Well, thanks. I just know.
From Monash University today with us, and he's going to share some of his precious knowledge, more than this definitely, on AI in law enforcement. So in the university, definitely AI is one of the trend, a big research area within Monash University. And law enforcement, we have a cybersecurity program, Dr. Wilson, and in the School of Computer Science. So definitely there will be like some area of topics that might interest you for further research and collaboration with Monash University as well. So without further ado, the time and place is yours, Dr. Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your time. So thank you for the great introduction as well. So my name is Campbell. I'm from a university in Melbourne called Monash University. I'm not sure how many of you know about Monash. So we're Australia's largest university. We have about 80,000 students now, I think?
Yeah.
80,000. And I'm from the Faculty of Information Technology at Monash. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is artificial intelligence and how it applies to law enforcement in Australia. And the way that I'm going to do that is to talk about a research lab that we've set up. And it's called the ALEC Lab, AI for Law Enforcement and Community Safety. That's what AILECS stands for. And I should say also before I start that unfortunately I have to talk about certain crime types during the presentation. And the crime type that we're most interested in tackling at the moment is child exploitation online. So I just say that it's actually quite a distressing topic to talk about. So if you feel uncomfortable about that, just let me know. I'm not going to go into detail about the crime itself, but just to let you know that that's what we'll talk about. So I'm the co-director of this lab. AFP stands for the Australian Federal Police. So the Australian Federal Police are Australia's central police agency. Australia has 6 state and territory police agencies. And the AFP is the police agency that does serious transnational crime, including international trade in online child exploitation material. So what I'm going to do, just before I start, I'm going to show you a short video, which is just a kind of a publicity video that we put together about the lab that we'll talk about a little bit about what it does, and then I'll go into more detail about what we do after that. So, hopefully the sound will work. Video. Oh. Sorry, my computer is having a problem. I'll try and play it at the end. So this is the outline of what I want to talk about, just basically a little bit about the history of this lab and what we do. And as part of that, I want to talk about 3 projects that are part of this lab and that led to the establishment of the lab. These projects were the result of a PhD student that was working with me, who's an AFP officer. And when he started his PhD, he actually didn't want to work on police topics. He wanted to do something that was separate to his work. But we soon realised that because he was a police officer and he's doing a PhD in computer science, there's a lot of scope for applying the computer science side of things to the law enforcement side of things. So we started looking at a few things. The first thing we looked at was this idea of what we call digital forensics triage. Is there anyone here that works in digital forensics? No, okay. So one of the problems that the police encounter is that when they're searching through devices, through laptops, hard disks, etc., certainly in Australia, they've only got a short time period to find evidence on those devices. So the clock is ticking. As soon as they find a hard disk that they're interested in, they can't just have it forever. So what we need to do is to come up with techniques essentially to speed up that evidential search for material of interest. So I'll talk about that first. Then I'll talk a little bit about the work we did on the dark web, which was around classifying what material was on the dark web and how it was being used by criminal elements. And lastly, talk a little bit about our image classification work and something called the data airlock, which is up there twice. I'm not sure why it's there twice, sorry. That's a really important initiative, and the reason it's important is that it's a way or a piece of infrastructure for allowing users to train machine learning algorithms on data that is actually very offensive to view and is illegal to possess. So they can't get access to that data normally. It's not like a normal training data set. So we need some way of building infrastructure so they can still train their algorithms without directly seeing the data. That's what the data airlock does. So the first thing was this digital forensics work, and we did work on this some time ago. So you'll see this paper is from 2015. All of the papers I'll refer to are in the same journal, by the way. They're all in Digital Investigation, which is a good journal if any of you are interested in publishing in this area, in AI and machine learning in particular as it applies to law enforcement. Because digital investigation is all about forensics, and it's read by a lot of practitioners in the area. So we did this work in 2015. We called it Multicolor File System Search, and essentially what it is a prioritised crawl strategy for searching through file systems. So as I said before, police have got limited time to search through file systems on seized devices. How can we improve that? And we did that by looking at an algorithm called multicolor tree search. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this. You know about it? Yeah, okay. So multicolor tree search is used in what's used in gameplay, in complex games, such as Go. These games that are very hard to brute force. You can't brute force Go. So the multicolor tree search algorithm, I'm not going to go into all the detail. Some of you already know about it, but basically you have a game tree where the nodes represent the state of the game at any particular point, and the connections between the nodes essentially represent actions that take you from one state to another state, which is typically a move in the game, some sort of move. And then essentially what you do is you traverse the tree based on some policy, and that policy balances the exploitation and the exploration of states. So you've got to try and balance looking at new game states which you haven't seen before versus exploiting positive game states that look quite favourable. And by doing that you select game states that look promising in the first step essentially. You then start to expand the node for nodes that have been visited before, for game states that have been visited before. And once you do that, and this is where this is the Monte Carlo side of it, if you like, the rollout. So what you do then is you just randomly play out particular actions. You randomly select actions until you get to a terminal state. Once you get to a terminal state, you look at how good that terminal state is, if you like, and score it, propagate the state values that are good back up through the tree, and then you do the whole process again. You just keep doing this. So it's a way of randomly exploring the game tree and using this balance between exploitation and exploration. Now it turns out that you can do a similar sort of thing in file systems. So you can actually modify this algorithm so that when you're searching through a large file system, which is also typically hierarchical, it's a tree structure, if you want to do this balancing of exploitation and exploration of files, you can do it using this sort of algorithm. So we built something like this. We called it Multicolor file system search, MCFS. And you know, the typical issue there is, okay, well, we're going to treat this search as a game, but then how do you score the results? How do you score what it means to find a particular file? It's not the same as a game, it's not exactly the same. So we had a few different scorers that we would use for states. One of them is a very simple scorer that says if a file that we found is identical to a set of known criminal files, we use an MD5 hash for that, then we'll give it a score of 1, otherwise we'll give it a score of 0. That's a very simple scoring approach. Another way of doing it was to look at the type of the file, So whether it's a JPEG or whether it's a text file or that sort of thing. Depending on the case, the criminal case, you might be more interested in looking for certain types of images versus text. So you give it a score based on what type the file is, and you could extend that to other metadata of the file, so large files versus small files, depends what you're interested in. So you can adapt that scoring system depending on what you're looking for. Or we can do a similarity-based scorer which says, well, how close, using some image similarity measure, is this image to known files of interest? Okay. So by combining all these things, we came up with this algorithm that essentially lets us search through file systems on seized devices, taking as input a whole set of known files of interest. Now, the federal police, like many police agencies, have very large databases of, in particular, child exploitation material. So anytime someone finds child exploitation material on the web, a police agency, they add it to this database so that we know what's already a file of interest. The question there is, how do you search through that database very quickly? You've really got to use a hash-based mechanism for that. Known ignorable files, that's actually really simple to explain. Basically on a Windows system, I don't care about the Windows directory that much. I don't care about DLLs. I don't care about all these other files that are not of interest. So I'll put that in there as known ignorable files. And then we'll search through the file system using a multicolor type approach of balancing exploitation and exploration. So we built this system. The AFP actually used this system in some cases as well, because what we were trying to do really was to come up with an algorithm that was very, very quick. Again, they've got a certain time limit on the investigation, so they really need a quick result. They don't need all the results. They just need some evidence quickly. So that was our first piece of work. And certainly I can share the paper with you if you want more detail about how it works. And it did work quite well. So you can see that multicolored file search versus uninformed and informed search actually did better. So what you want to do here is you want MCFS here. So in general, shorter search times or smaller amounts of files that need to be examined before you get to the first one. So the blue bar is the first file found. So here, for instance, we had to go through, maybe 12% of the files to find the first file of interest, versus hopefully a slightly, for an uninformed search. This is just basically a depth first traversal of the tree. It takes a lot longer to find the file of interest. All these different things are the different scorers, so that's type of interest. PhotoDNA is a perceptual hash that Microsoft released for comparing images really quickly. So we used that as a similarity scorer. We also did a scorer based on the amount of skin in the image, because that's an indication of potential illegal files. So the results were quite good. And as I said, the AFP actually used this system in practice. So that was our first piece of work that got us started on this AI and law enforcement endeavour. The next thing we did was quite different. So this was about the dark web. So the dark web, you're probably all familiar with the dark web. So the Tor browser, it's practically anonymous to browse the dark web. There are ways by inserting malware in certain sites to trace back, but it's actually pretty much anonymous browsing. Okay. The problem with the dark web is that because it's anonymous, criminal networks, of course, may prefer to use the dark web than the normal web where it's easier for them to be traced. So we thought, okay, what we want to do is we just want to randomly crawl the dark web, just download random dark web pages. And what the police were interested in was to kind of categorise not just the content, not just what is there, but how people are using that content. So this caused a few issues in the sense that if we set up a machine at Monash University that's randomly downloading pages from the dark web, it's very likely that we will break Australian law because the dark web tends to have more illegal material on it than the normal web. So we had to write letters to the federal government. It went all the way up to the Attorney General, the Federal Attorney General in Australia, who said, okay, you're allowed to do this research. And really the reason we're allowed to do it was because we had the federal police involved. I couldn't do it myself, because I don't have the clearance to do it. So we set up this machine. As I said, we've got federal government approval to do it. And what we came up with was a motivation model that kind of described how people were using content on the dark web. And unfortunately, it was all manually labelled, so we had to manually label over 4,000 sites using this model. And basically, the model just has criteria for whether the motivation is financial, whether it's educational. We had a few different categories. What we found was that around about 60% of the dark web was material that was either illegal or unethical. Around the other 40%, just boring, standard stuff. And there's a lot of people who use the dark web for completely legal purposes. And there's no problem using it. You can download Tor and run it. That's not illegal in itself. I mean, a lot of people are concerned about privacy. That's fine. But criminals are also concerned about privacy. So what we found was quite an interesting picture of the dark web. That bar down the bottom, if you like, this is kind of that 40% that was not of interest at all. And then all the other stuff that was really interesting, because what we found was that there was a lot of stuff about finance. Okay? And what does finance mean from an illegal perspective? Typically it means cryptocurrency tumblers. So it's basically money laundering using cryptocurrencies. There was a lot of that on the dark web. There was a lot of drugs for sale. A lot of pages were just search engines because there's no search engine for the dark web as such. There's just kind of lists of pages, just links to other pages. Because pages go up and down, addresses change, that's how people maintain their anonymity. Pornography, so child exploitation material was there, but not in as much detail or as large an extent as we thought it might be there. Definitely weapons for sale, violence. But what was really interesting was this one, that there was virtually nothing about extremism, terrorism. And what we believe is that those sort of networks are not so much using the dark web anymore. They tend to be using encrypted messaging apps and in a much more decentralized approach. Many messaging apps like WhatsApp are end-to-end encrypted. This causes big problems for law enforcement actually, because it's impossible to intercept decrypt those messages, you have to decrypt on the device itself. That's the only place the message is stored in decrypted form. So extremism just wasn't really there. And then when we started to look at, so that was content, then we wanted to look at the motivation. So it was quite interesting. So for drugs, by far the biggest motivation for drug sites was selling drugs. Okay, people getting rich out of making money from selling these sorts of drugs, and in fact, pretty much all of it was some sort of marketplace. Okay. When you look at the child exploitation material on the dark web, the picture is quite different. Okay, and this is it's actually quite disturbing when you think about it. That the financial aspect was much less than what we call the discussion aspect. So sharing this material, things like education and training, and as I said, I'm sorry to have to talk about it, but basically there are communities on the dark web that advocate this sort of thing, and sort of how you can go about things and all those sorts of, it's very distasteful material, but quite different motivations than the drug motivations. And then other sorts of pornography, which is not child exploitation material, but is still illegal. Huge marketplace motivations again. So, in fact, for most content on the dark web, people are putting it there to make money. That was our main finding. So that was our second sort of piece of work in the lab. And the third piece of work that generated this collaboration was to look a bit more closely at this problem of child exploitation material. This is so it's a crime that's devastating to so many people, but it's also devastating to law enforcement because they have to look at these images and they have to say, this image is worse than this image, this sort of thing. Because certainly in Australia, for sentencing, the courts require that someone says this much of this material is of this level, and this much is at a lower level or higher level, and I'm not going to go into what the levels are, but it's very distressing. It's very distressing for everyone involved. So what we thought we could do is come up with image classification algorithms that try and classify this material automatically so that people don't have to look at it, basically. Now, in order to do that, so some of you work in deep learning and image classification, and you know that you need a couple of things. The first thing is you need a lot of data. You need lots and lots of images. Now, that's a problem. If you want to get lots and lots of images of illegal nature, child exploitation material, it's very difficult to do that. The only way you can do it ethically is to work with a law enforcement agency. So that's why we work with the Australian Federal Police. You also need to make sure that that data is structured in such a way that, as I said earlier, researchers don't also get psychologically damaged by this. So I don't want to look at any of this material. So I don't look at it. But I'm doing the research. So I'm trying to build the algorithms to classify this. So how do we deal with that problem? The way we dealt with that problem is through this data airlock, which I'll talk about in a second. So that's the first problem, the data. The second problem is that you need to classify the data for training. So you need to have some sort of classification schema to train your algorithm. And it has to be objective. The problem with child exploitation investigations worldwide is that different countries have different classification schemes. So we had to try and address those two problems. We did address them relatively well, and deep learning algorithms, we did show, do a reasonable job of classifying this material. But as I said, in order to train the algorithms, we needed some mechanism for storing the data in a safe way, what we did was we built this thing called a data airlock. The data airlock was a joint project between Monash, the Federal Police, and an organisation called Data 61 in Australia, which is the Australian government's IT commercialisation actually. So we spent about $1 million developing this system, and essentially what it is a computer system that uses virtualization, uses containers, uses a lot of encryption to separate out the data which is stored in what we call vaults inside a very secure zone. And in fact, there is no connection, there is no physical connection between this part of the data airlock and the outside world. The only way to get data into this is for the AFP to come into the data center, upload it through USB or whatever. Otherwise, it's just not secure enough. But what we do need is some way of researchers saying, well, how am I going to test my code? I've got this great model, deep learning model, I want to run it on this data, how do I do that? What we do is we get the researchers to submit that model, so their Python code, for instance, and the libraries, etc., as a container. So as a Docker container, for instance, or something like that, for those of you who are familiar with that. The code is then vetted by the police to make sure there's no attempt to exfiltrate any data. And then the code is set to run in what we call an airlock, which essentially is an encrypted virtualized container. And then eventually the researchers get the results back, and then they can tune their algorithms. What we want to do with this data airlock is to provide this to researchers worldwide, so that any researcher can submit algorithms to train on this data, because the fight against child exploitation is a transnational fight, and we need people from all over the world to be involved. Okay, so all of this work led to the establishment of this lab called the Alex Lab. It's funded by the AFP and funded by Monash University. It's about $2.5 million of funding over 3 years. So we use that funding for postdocs and PhD students. So those of you that are interested in a PhD in the future, come and talk to me. We might have some things for you. There are co-directors from the Federal Police and from Monash. So I'm the co-director from the Monash side. There is a co-director from the police side as well, to make sure that we're meeting the objectives of both organisations. And this delivers on government priorities. So from the AFP side, this is direct government funding from the Department of Home Affairs in Australia. Because it's a high priority to address this sort of crime. Now, we don't want this lab to just stay stuck working on those 3 problems I talked about before, the MCFS, the dark web, and the image classification. We need to go further than that. And by partnering with FIT, this is my advertisement for the faculty of IT, we have a lot of strengths inside the faculty, not just in AI, but also in cybersecurity, human-computer interaction, and also the people side of IT. We call that organisational informatics. And we also have research themes in the faculty that go across all of those expertise areas. And it's really the applied AI one that the lab fits into. So where do we go from here? Basically, we have an ethos in the lab that says we want to collaborate within Monash, so not just in the data science teams, as I said, with cybersecurity, with organisational informatics, etc., but also we're working very closely with the law faculty, with criminologists in the arts faculty, within Australia and also internationally. So this week I was talking to one of our university partners in Singapore, NTU. I was talking to Interpol the other day as well. They're very interested in collaboration with this And we're always open to collaboration. So if there's anything we can talk about here as well, about how we can work together, we'd love to do that. We want to open source as much as possible of any software we develop. We don't want to keep anything secret because law enforcement needs to have this technology and they need to have it quickly. So we're going to open source as much as we can. The research needs to be translated very quickly into practice. I mean, it's great to publish papers in journals and conferences, that's fantastic, but from the police point of view, they need actual work in the field. So we want to do both. And of course we want to make a difference. Rapidly enhance the capabilities of law enforcement. But that means more than just what we've been doing. It means doing a lot more. So we're definitely, our initial project scope definitely is in this image and video machine learning classification. So we've already started doing that with child exploitation, but counter-terrorism material is the next one we want to look at, because some of the images and videos that come out of counter-terrorism investigations are also extremely psychologically distressing. And the police have a big problem with this as well. Techniques for leveraging massive law enforcement data sets. To be honest, law enforcement worldwide is collecting more and more data, a lot of data, and many times they don't know what to do with it or how best to sift them through it. We're interested in image localization, so can you take an image and automatically determine what location that image was taken in, maybe what year it was taken? I mean, that's a hard task, but there are certain cues in some images that let you do that or help with that. Identify victims very quickly, so quickly match victims in, for instance, child exploitation investigations with known databases of people, so that we can link people involved with that person to try and identify the victim really quickly. Scalable near-duplicate image detection techniques. Okay, this is really interesting because just recently Facebook open sourced their image and video hashing similarity code. And actually when I looked at it, it's not that advanced actually. Their video hashing is based on conceptual hashes that have been around for a long time. Why is Facebook open sourcing that now? Because Facebook has a big problem. And the big problem is that, for instance, the classic problem is what happened in New Zealand recently. The shootings that happened in New Zealand. There was a video that was made by the shooter as it was happening. That video was uploaded onto Facebook. People then shared that hundreds, thousands of times. This is a problem because that spreads horrible material, but it also puts Facebook in a difficult position because they're starting to break laws. So in Australia, for instance, there is now a law recently enacted which says that you're not allowed to spread this sort of material on your platform. And if you know about it, then you need to get it down within a certain amount of time, and you need to work with the federal police to investigate how it happens. What they need is techniques to really, really quickly find copies of the same information. So they've released this hash. We're actually looking at this hash and kind of stress testing it at the moment on AFP data. That's an interesting project. And the last two, I think, are really, really important with anything you do with AI and law enforcement. The first one is that if you're using algorithms to try and investigate crimes, and you get to a point at some point where you have to explain how that algorithm came to its decision, in other words, you're defending an algorithm in court versus defending a person, you better be very sure that you know how the algorithm came to that decision. As you probably know, certain algorithms, it's much easier to do that than others. So probabilistic graphical models are actually relatively easy to explain because you can see how the inference flows. Deep learning, forget it. It's just, it's learning features, you don't know what's going on inside there. So that's really, really hard, and probably the best you can do with deep learning is to explain how you got the training data together, what classes you're training on, how you came up with those classes, that sort of thing. And lastly, and the last one might even be the biggest one, the ethics. So law enforcement depends on the country you're in, and I have to be careful here, be recorded. There's different ethics in different countries. So certainly in Australia, the police view policing as a partnership with the community, and it's very important that they maintain trust with the community. And I think most law enforcement agencies feel the same way, that you can't enforce the law unless you have the trust of the community. If you start doing things with artificial intelligence, you don't explain what you're doing, you can run the risk of breaching that trust. So it's very important that we look at the ethical use of AI. And I think, so this is just one example of collaboration. So as I said, last week I was talking to NTU. This is just one example of a collaboration. They're not all going to be like this, but NTU is doing some really interesting work with the courts in Singapore. So in particular with the state courts. And the work they're doing is all around using information retrieval algorithms to allow judges and lawyers to really, really quickly find relevant documents and precedents for cases. So it's actually really interesting because we're coming at it on Monash, we're coming at it from the law enforcement side, they're coming at it from the judiciary side, but actually there is a pipeline of investigation through to prosecution, through that whole police into the judicial process. So we're looking at how we can combine our techniques in that sort of pipeline. So that's all I have. I'll try and get the video going in a second. But in the meantime, happy to take questions. That's my Twitter. I don't tweet much. You can follow me, get some followers on me. And I'm on WhatsApp on that number if you want. Great, thank you. Anything?
I'm curious about for you how can the police manually in
There was no previous approach, so it was just a pure use whatever the operating system provides. So Windows has got its little search. Yeah. There was no approach like this.
usually we are moving toward machine learning and AI, but sometimes the companies doesn't provide. They have lots of data, very unstructured data. In your experience, does it store in context, for example, the police, like you said, or is far unstructured? If yes, how bad is does it compare to the data drawn in the university?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So police data often is very unstructured because what happens is they just get this, they just seize a lot of data and then they have to try and make sense of it. The classic example is when there are cybersecurity breaches, and often, and I know that because they've come to me with this problem before, they said, what we've got here is this huge dump of data, and we know that it was in a criminal network, and we know that they hacked it from somewhere, and somewhere in there is credit card numbers, and somewhere in there is people's details, but it's all just one unstructured mess. So they're also interested in entity extraction techniques. So how can you quickly go through and extract what is a name, what is a credit card number, what is a place, and then build a knowledge graph of that. So the answer is that some of their data is incredibly unstructured. But it depends on the type of investigation. On the child exploitation side, there's a lot of structured data actually, and that's because of many years of efforts of different law enforcement agencies building up these big databases of images, where the images were found, what year they were found, ages of victims, times. So they have these big databases. So it's a real mix. Some of it's a real mess, and some of it's much more structured.
We have like a rule of thumb or usually every case, I mean, usually we have, we're talking about the title, not the content itself.
Yep.
The content can be anything, which I would think, what is your approach on dealing with this unstructured and converted to structured?
Yeah. So like I said, and you pointed out that it's very much dependent on the investigation, type of investigation. I think the first step usually is to, as I said, try and identify entities in the data and then build some semantic graph from there. But the problem is there's also a lot of noise. Honestly, some of it's going to take some initial manual tuning, and the only people who can do that are the police themselves, because a lot of this data is not stuff that we're allowed to look at. So all we can do is kind of advise on the steps. So they definitely have a big digital forensics department in the AFP, for instance, that does a lot of manual stuff. And maybe all they need to do is enough manual stuff to get the process going, and then we can automate it from there. But all I can say is there's no real rule of thumb, but it's a huge problem that you've identified. It's certainly a big issue. Like I was at the AFP recently, and they describe what they've got as a data lake. It's a lake of data, and it's petabytes. You know, it's huge amounts of data that they really want to link together. And that's data that's built up over years from different investigations, and they've got a pretty good idea. You know, police have got instincts about what's linked. So they're saying, we're pretty sure in this case something is linked to something in this case over here. We've got data that relates to both. We'd love some automated technique to try and highlight those things. It's not easy. Other questions?
About the MCFS.
Oh yeah.
I'm wondering if we need to train separate tree for each case, or we can have big one tree for all the cases.
So it is one tree. I need to send you the paper though, because there's certain things we do to collapse nodes together that make it possible to do it in one tree. So, for instance, because it's not exactly the same as a game when you do this, right? I'm trying to cast my mind to what was actually done in the paper, because it was 4 years ago. There's kind of virtual nodes that we insert into the tree that kind of collapse together all the subdirectories, for instance, into one node and store them together. So it's not exactly the same. It's kind of like multiple trees, but collapsed into sub trees in one big tree. I'll send you the paper. I'm going to just see if I can get that video running. It's quite a short video, but it's just it's quite nice to look at. If there's any other questions, please just ask me. Any other questions while we're waiting for that? The video is just kind of a publicity.
The internet, hard drives, we're looking at thousands of times. 10 years ago, we were dealing with a couple of phones, maybe some CDs. And now, like everything else in the world, with the internet, hard drives, we're looking at thousands of times more data, but there aren't thousands of times more voice. For a person to be charged for possessing child exploitation or radicalisation material, for example, a human investigator has to review it and say, yep, I say that is child exploitation. It has an emotional impact. Each person shows it differently, but it is there. And sadly, I guess the biggest problem is often you don't realise the impact until it's already happened.
One of the issues in dealing with image classification is that you need to train your classification algorithms on data, on real data. In this case, this real data is sensitive, it's illegal to possess in many cases, and it's distressing to you. So we've come up with a system called a data airlock in conjunction with Data 61, which enables researchers to test and train their algorithms on this data without actually being exposed to it themselves. We think this is a world-first initiative and it's a key contribution to ours.
What's unique about this research is the collaboration between law enforcement and university. There are maybe 2 or 3 other places in the world where you get access to the data, the motivation and the resources to do this stuff. The results have been strong enough that it's kicked off Project Stone Vision for the US, which is an automation piece to enable training of classifiers out of Monash as part of the other side, without requiring any more work by digital forensics members investigators or police.
In general, this technology has application beyond child exploitation, in particular counter-terrorism investigations, or any investigation where highly distressing and offensive imagery is likely to be encountered.
The Alex Lab is a really good example of where we're using AI to have positive social impact on society. When we realised from that, when we looked across Monash University, we had hundreds of similar examples using AI in a wide variety of fields for all the mission statement of AI for social good. So we decided to bring all of that together under one banner called the Monash Data Futures Institute.
It's really just that video. But yeah, it's kind of exciting work because it has a real impact in the community. So we're very happy to talk to people about partnering with us. Thank you for listening.
Any questions? Probably one question for me, Dr.
Yep.
Wilson. Do you already have any kinds of collaboration that you have expanded abroad? I mean, like this one for sure is with the government of Australia.
Yep.
But let's say for like other countries or other institutions in other countries, let's say.
So definitely we had the Singapore one with NTU.
Yeah.
The other thing to say is that the Australian Federal Police, like all police agencies, they talk to police agencies all over the world. So we're talking with the Netherlands police. We're talking to, interestingly, police in Brazil. It's really interesting mix of countries. So in Brazil, there's been very similar work on this child exploitation material using AI and techniques to classify. So we're working with them as well. So yeah, there's a whole network building up. And certainly Indonesia is very important as well. I should say that, so Australia and Indonesia, as you know, have very important government-to-government strategic relationships. These sorts of crimes, as I said, they don't respect borders. So there are lots of opportunities, I believe, for collaborative work between countries, funded collaborative work between countries. So for instance, in Australian government, I think, would be open, I'm speaking for the Australian government, but would be open to looking at funding projects across different countries, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, to attack these problems. So that's why we're just interested in talking to as many people as we can and just hearing as many ideas as we can as to how we can all work together.
Yeah. So I will try to convey probably like the topic of today, or if it's possible for you to send out the presentation.
Yeah,
file.
sure. I can send you
Because
this.
as I've mentioned, we have our own cybersecurity program within the school,
Yep.
and they have a very close relationship with the law enforcement in Indonesia.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm just trying to find, let's say, if there's opportunity.
That would be really
in that area.
interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, please give a big applause again to this is more token of appreciation that will be given by Dr. Johnson, please. When apparently you have one. That one comes with everybody's bag.
This is amazing. No, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, one over here. 1, 2, and this one for stories.
Sorry.
Must be practical.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, the video, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thanks all for coming.
Yeah, and also this is from us, small. Do you want to give it? Oh, yeah, okay. With my arm sling. I should put something here.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more. It's for the story.
For the story.
1, 2. Okay.
Okay. Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.